Okay, I'm just going to hang out here just for a couple of minutes just to keep ensuring that everyone gets notified and we have enough opportunity to join in as we do. I can see that Kitty's joined. Hello. Hello, and I actually am just using my number 5 chakra spray to assist me. A part of me was feeling really nervous this morning. A part of me was feeling really empowered. A part of me was feeling really strong. A part of me was feeling really healthy. And the part of me that was feeling nervous asked to pull a card, and the card that I pulled was to share my voice and to release the fear of persecution. And I guess that's what part of stepping into this arena is about. Hi, I'm just going to keep waiting a couple of minutes to keep going. My day has been productive, and I actually just went and picked 8 eggs up from my chicken coop and fed the puppies and fed the cats, and I sorted out all the animals so that I could get started to have this conversation today. And I can see there's a few of you on. Say hi as you're jumping on live. I'd love to hear from you, whether you're live or if you're watching this replay later. It would definitely be lovely to hear from you. So please leave a comment, drop a heart, let me know that you're around. And I am going to be looking at, I don't normally do this when I'm speaking, but I'm going to be looking at some notes today just to assist me on this journey. There's a lot of different things that I want to share and say, and I don't want to get like super passionate and go off track. And normally when I speak, I can definitely do that. And so I want to make this as helpful for everybody as I possibly can, and I want to provide information that is relevant for my decision, and you also might find that you learn some great things along the way. That's what I'm hoping. Carissa, thank you. I'm glad that you think I'm amazing, and I love you very much. I feel the same about you. And yeah, I just really want to give everybody who is watching, whether live on the replay, the opportunity to ask questions and to interact. And I'll just stop at different intervals and check in with the questions. I want to help everyone feel really supported. And I certainly am not concerned about any question that you might throw at me. So whatever's on your mind, bring it. I feel like I would love to perhaps satisfy a gap in your knowledge, or satisfy some part of your curiosity that hopefully I talk about it all today. In saying that, there's so many different points that I could have elaborated much further on. And so I can see that, yeah, there's a few of you who are joining on and off, and I would love to hear from you. I'd love you to say hi. I'd love you to drop a heart. Just connect with me. And I feel like it's pretty much time to get started. And I really find it extra interesting that I have been drawn to drop this conversation into the collective today, which for a lot of people in Victoria is classified as kind of Freedom Day. And what I think is so interesting about that is that I don't really find it is freedom when all of a population can't be involved. It really doesn't resonate with me, and it doesn't make a lot of sense. And I really also don't find it to be a freedom if you were one of those people that felt like you had to do something to your body that you actually didn't want to do, and you felt like you were pressured into doing, that you were forced into doing. And that's definitely a common scenario right now. And I'm definitely aware also, and it might be people who are watching now, it might be people who are watching later, there are people who have chosen willingly, ably, and absolutely all in to get the vaccination. It completely satisfied their needs and their criteria, and they willingly chose to input that to their body. And so they should have that right. And I applaud everybody who did make that decision. I feel really great about it. Yeah, goddess of the hunt. Yes, not a lot of people care about the COVID antibody test as an exemption for vaccinations. And again, I just have so many curiosities about why that could be so. It's really, really interesting. I feel like the level of embodied healthcare is actually not available to Australia at the moment. There's just been so many different incongruencies and changes to our legislation and changes to what our healthcare professionals are able to do for us. And so what I wanted to share also kind of initially, there are no exemptions because it's not about health. From the perspective of international law, the right to informed consent is the bedrock principle of ethical standards in all medicines. Even I'm a naturopathic medicine practitioner and I have different oaths that I need to adhere to, and they certainly do in allopathic medicine. So according to the Article 6 of UNESCO's Universal Declaration on Bioethics and Human Rights, this is a 2005 constitutional piece. It says any preventative, diagnostic and therapeutic medical intervention is only to be carried out with the prior, free and informed consent of the person concerned based on adequate information. There's many different parts that you could pick apart. The consent should, where appropriate, be expressed and may be withdrawn by the person concerned at any time and for any reason without disadvantage or prejudice. And I wanted to drop that in there because, I personally don't agree that this choice should be forced upon anyone, and that any choice related to personal health should force a change in how others view or speak or interact with us. Like having these, I'm using the word gross, but I mean to say big, having these big changes felt and seen and heard across our community that are to do with judgment about someone else's health status. That's not the kind of world that I feel like any of us really want to live in. And I believe that the compliance that we're seeing at the moment is encouraged through the illusion of legality rather than legality itself. And again, it's a really confusing grey area, and I feel like it's like that on purpose. And I'm sure if you like me are involved in different groups to do with the law issues, there are class actions coming, there are lawsuits coming, but what about this moment of right now? It can get really troubling to traverse this particular landscape, this current environment, and particularly in Victoria on Freedom Day. And so I think these are really pivotal times. It requires so much consideration of what we are choosing to think, what we're choosing to feel, what we're choosing to believe, what we're choosing to say, and how we're choosing to act on a daily basis. And hopefully you can feel that I'm not acting hysterically. I am not the sort of person who has ever provided misinformation. I have a very scientific, very analytical, very logical brain. I have studied science for quite a long period in my life. And so as we go further into the information that I want to share in this live, every data or fact or physiology component that I mention, I absolutely share it from the viewpoint of citing it in the literature, or an Australian government site. So I'm definitely not looking at, some weird pages on the internet, or as a doctor made a point on the post the other day, like from somebody in Nimbin, or, just some derogatory comment about my sources. Please understand that the sources that I choose to interact with are all scientifically validated or government validated, and I'm just using that information to come to my decisions. And I am here in every way of my whole entire being, like the frequency of my being, the vibration of my being, to support and enhance our community, our health, our empowerment, our connection, our spirit, our wellness. I think that that's what is life, and this is what I live for. And that's why I wanted to offer this conversation. I've had so many people reach out and ask me about my decisions, the why of my decision, the how of my decision. I've had a lot of judgment around my decision. I've had a lot of support with my decision. And I guess it was the number of questions around my decision that really prompted me to share more on a more public platform. And I finally feel like I have enough energy inside of my body to be able to support it through any attacks or vilification or judgment or blame or shame or whatever might come up as a result of me sharing, just because of these current uncertain times. And so I definitely do believe in ongoing health and health plans. I do not necessarily believe in dis-ease. When I teach in my other courses, in my other subjects, I talk about the word dis-ease. Disease. There's a lack of ease in a human body. And I definitely want to bring up some more points about that today. And so My goal for sharing this information is to offer some information that perhaps you didn't know before, and hopefully to expand a little bit upon your physiology knowledge. What I have noticed from talking to many people is they have no idea about their body, the pathways in their body, even what inflammation is. I just got a comment on here saying that my hair grew back mighty fast. For any of you that might have seen over the weekend, my beautiful best friend Taylor made a photo of me on an app where I had my head shaved. It looked very, very shaved, and a lot of people were very invested in the fact that I had lost my rainbow. So yeah, I guess it's being healthy. I did grow my hair back really fast. I ate a lot of vegetables over the last 3 days. So what I believe is that the more you know about your own body and how and why it functions the way it does, the more empowered you are in every aspect of your life. And as a health practitioner, as a skin therapist, that's actually the information that I provide for people. It doesn't matter how I'm looking after them. Understanding more about yourself offers you the opportunity to make choices for yourself. You don't have to be dictated by somebody else who says that they know more about your body. You are the one who knows the most about your body. You're living in it and it's yours. That's what I fully believe. And so when we give up our power by saying that somebody else knows more about our body than us, it can help really lead into feelings of helplessness and discouragement and feeling really small and insignificant. And those sort of emotions are not very helpful for a human psychological playground, I have noticed in my practitioner life and in my personal life. And so I also wanted to drop in here that critical questioning is part of science. It is what science is built on. To suppress questioning at the moment, to suppress like expanded perspective and understanding, that is actually not science. Science hasn't made all of these innovations, these evolutions, these expansions into different technologies and abilities to be able to treat and prevent disease without asking critical questions, without having hypotheses and theories. That's what they do tests and experiments for. That's why there is controversy. There is blocks of scientists that say one thing, there's blocks of scientists that say another thing. And I just want to remind you all that, less than 30 years ago, there was still a lot of scientists who didn't really believe in the microbiome, didn't really believe in the effects of the microbiome and its interrelationship with our health and our nervous system, our immune system. Again, around about 30 years ago, there were still scientists that said our brain wasn't plastic, it was fixed. Science makes mistakes. Science does continue on a journey and on a path. And there are many things that can be purported as science, and we generally always have to remember that there is some funding that goes into that research. There's some funding that goes into that scientific paper. There's some funding that goes into that university. There's some funding that goes into that medical school. And you have to look behind the curtain, lift the veil, open your eyes, open your ears, do a little bit of further investigation as to find where some of that funding comes from and how that might create some bias or some control or some changes in the information and how it's disseminated and who it's disseminated to. Wow, I've already gone off track from my notes. So what I wanted to say is critical questioning is definitely part of science. And I thought that autonomy was something that we had worked towards as part of humanity. It's part of being human, and it's part of the goal of humanity. And we've looked at being in Australia, we and me have looked at other sections of our population and been like, God, we need to do something. Like, I'm such a philanthropist. I'm always trying to help people move into a state of greater autonomy, whether I'm supporting them through their education or their health or whatever, or even supporting animals with their own autonomy. That is where we know our globe thrives. When people are autonomous and cohesive and able to work in a collective because they appreciate each other's differences and can work with it in a compassionate, kind and patient way. It's pretty hard to hold and maintain all of those feelings of unity and all of those emotions I just mentioned when fear, segregation, judgment and blame are running the show. And so I want to kind of move away from those principles. So far away. So I want to talk about the severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2. And I'm going to call it C19 or COVID from now on. It basically, just so I can make this, completely clear before I start the rest of this conversation, it has a global survival rate resting between 98% and 99.5%. a global survival rate. So even the countries that seem that they, or like they have been devastated, there's still a huge survival rate, and I think that that's a very comforting thought and fact to know about. However, COVID-19 is a very powerful reminder of the ability of any infectious disease to disrupt, to sicken, and obviously to sometimes kill, even in the most technologically advanced, even in the most medically advanced Western societies. And these are the same societies where connection to self, connection to optimal health, connection to nature, connection to really good food choices have fallen by the wayside. So we're looking at this huge disruption, even though we are so clever, so smart. And I kind of am interested to know what's underneath that, and why are we so reliant on someone else telling us that the only solution is this? It's only this one way. I have spent a lifetime increasing my perspective on life, and I've found that when I've gone from a narrow radar to a much wider one, life completely changes, and my opportunities in life and potentials in life completely change because I'm more open. And so when I also talk about the fact that optimal health has fallen by the wayside, I'm going to present some facts and figures here that I find really disturbing. And I do teach about some of this stuff in some of my other courses. Did you know that globally, like developed and non-developed nations I'm talking about, approximately 1 in 3, that's 33% of all adults, suffer from multiple chronic conditions. And if you suffer from multiple chronic conditions, it's going to obviously set you up in a much greater way at a higher risk for any infection. And so 1 in 3 adults, because of their underlying health status, are set up to be disrupted by the presentation of a new virus out in our world. And so shockingly, in a developed nation, this figure is actually closer to 3 out of 4 adults, 75% of our community, of our adult community. That's a pretty huge statistic that creates an understanding that there was an unwell proportion of our population to start with. And so 3 in 5 global deaths are attributed to the 4 major non-communicable diseases. That's again prevalent across the world, prevalent in Australia: cardiovascular disease, cancer, chronic lung diseases, diabetes. These are all diseases that begin with and are exacerbated by inflammation. And now I don't know how much you know about inflammation. I know a lot. I've done a lot of study on inflammation, on inflammaging, on all the different changes that can happen in the cells, in tissues, in organ systems. But it's basically driven by something called our exposome. And you might not have ever heard that term before, but basically that is all of the different influences over the course of our lifespan, genetic, epigenetic, or otherwise. So our exposure to, like the foods that we eat, how we're moving, how we're sleeping, how we're resting, how we're playing, how we're growing, how we're learning, how we're interacting in our communities, what is our exposure level to toxins, to chemicals, to drugs, pharmaceutical or otherwise. And so much of our exposome is modifiable. It is actually up to each individual as to the impact of that and how they traverse in their environment and what they can do to reduce their risk to known inflammatory substances. And so that's also true. That modifiable risk is up to us on a daily basis. It's not just like on a sometimes basis. We all have the opportunity to interact with our exposome intentionally and consciously with awareness on a daily basis. And again, this is information that I feel like most people don't know about. They've never heard of the word exposome. They don't understand what it means for them. It's not really a tangible thing, but it is actually information that is very well known, and it is being more and more scientifically linked to the way we live and the choices that we're making as an industrialized nation and as the choices that we're making as a highly medicalized nation. So scarily, development of chronic diseases is actually now happening at much younger ages than it ever was before. And think about this as being a huge burden on society. Like when someone's sick, who's paying for that? I mean, that person's paying for it with their energy, with their vitality, with their lack of being able to connect to others, to fulfilling life, to living with joy, purpose and passion. But then there's impacts on society when we've got someone in our community that's not able to contribute in kind of varying scales of severity, I guess, depending on what's going on for that person. There are financial impacts, there's economic impacts that are rippling out, there's health system impacts, there's so many impacts. So this chronic burden is crippling our nations. Like Australia spends a fortune on chronic disease. And I don't feel that I have noticed over the entire course of my lifetime, I definitely have not seen any person make what I consider to be ongoing lifestyle and health choices that are contributing to the development and progression of any number of these chronic conditions. You know, we see these people everywhere, every day, just making these choices that don't serve their health over and over and over. And we know that they're a burden on our healthcare systems, and we know that they're a burden in different ways upon all different levels of society, all the way through to the individual. They're not being penalized in any way. They are not being forced to live differently in our society. They haven't been mandated against. They haven't been, punished with fines or other orders. I find that pretty full on. Like, to say that there is going to be this huge healthcare burden that is going to be created by the great hordes of unvaccinated people, really? Is that so true? Oh gosh, I'm missing some of these points here too. Yeah, totally. I'm definitely going to share it as an IGTV. Thanks for checking in. If there's no other questions, I'm going to keep moving, and I'm going to keep checking back in with my sheet so that I keep staying back on point. All right. And again, I want to reiterate, I just want to make sure that I really want to make this clear. If you're vaccinated, awesome. I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I am a pro-choice. I'm pro-inclusivity. I am about health empowerment. If you chose to be vaccinated, amazing. And if you need support with that, I can support with that. That's not my conversation today. What I want to bring up is just these comparisons that are being made about health burdens, and that is actually not so valid. And it's not like these other health burdens haven't been known about for, we've been developing these chronic conditions. They're escalating over the last 40 years. They've been going up on a pretty huge upward trajectory. So it's not okay to make that comparison, in my opinion. And if you are vaccinated, surely that means that you are protected. And it means you are definitely going to have less symptoms if you do catch COVID. You can still catch COVID. You will just have your symptoms are just much less severe. So they're mild symptoms. And so if it works to protect you who are vaccinated, and which is why you chose to be vaccinated, why does it have to be mandated across our entire nation? If this vaccination is applying to those who feel that they are in the most need, they're a vulnerable population, they're a high risk category, amazing. If you do catch COVID, your symptoms are going to be very mild. That's awesome. But from my perspective, obviously the worst thing that can happen to you is this mild symptomology. The worst thing that could happen to me is that I get COVID very severely. So if that was to really bother me, then I would go and get a vaccination. If that the concept of that, if I thought that would happen in my body. Kai, thank you. I do get very passionate. I do. I have so much I want to share, and I do get very excited. And so I personally have gone to great lengths to amplify and enhance my health status. And anyone that knows me can completely vouch for that as being the way that I live my life. And I definitely, since C19 has started, I have paved the way to reduce any potential burden upon our healthcare systems in as many different ways as possible. And I will explain more about them as we go on. I am choosing to improve my life and my health in very conscious, very aware, very specific, very active, and very long-term ways. It's not just something I do one day on a Monday at 4 p.m. This is how I live. This is the choices that I'm making. And that reduces the burden of chronic disease without a doubt. What I'm doing is not just for COVID, it is actually going to reduce the long-term burden over Australia's health care system forever, for as long as I'm alive, hopefully. And that is never celebrated. It's not rewarded. It's not encouraged. And I find that also bizarre. I'm also actively educating myself on a daily basis in anatomy, physiology, psychology, and energy. I'm currently, like, I've just finished doing a certification for the biology of trauma course. I am currently studying with Dr. Sarah McKay, a PhD neuroscientist in her Neuroscience Academy. And there's many other things that I have done. I am actively seeking to understand the human body more, to resource myself more, to resource human health more as I share more information. But what I am doing always is actively caring for myself, and I'm choosing to be accountable for my health, my choices, and I'm choosing what my health is. Many other things, yes. Traditional health systems and major dis-ease programs, they rarely address the root cause of chronic diseases, infections, or otherwise. They're looking at the symptomology. They're looking to treat the symptomology. They're not sitting there with the patient addressing the underlying reasons. Why is your immune system so dysfunctional? What's happened to make your nervous system, your immune system, your microbiome, and your hormones go so out of whack that disease is so prevalent in your body? Let's see if we can take some steps backwards, wind that back, and let's start rectifying some of those issues that have led you to this point right now. No. You get a 10-minute appointment with a GP. They might look at your blood markers if you're in the reference range, which the reference range, if you don't really know, is looking at the population of people. 95% of the population of people, they're looking at a bell curve. That population of people could be really unwell, and you want to compare your blood markers against the reference range. That doesn't float with me either. I'm not going to talk about that right now though. All right. So traditional health systems and major disease programs, they just do not often intervene early to provide preventative and maintenance wellness programs and optimal health testing. They are looking for disease and symptomology of disease. They definitely wait until people are sick before acting. And that's what I just find so confusing with COVID. So much information has been shared from 2019. It was even a few reports made. Definitely from 2020 onwards, a plethora of reports talking about risk factors and comorbidities related to COVID symptomology and severity. Here we are, nearly 2 years down the track. No one's done any preventative wellness work on those markers, which make a huge difference to how patients recover. They make a huge difference to whether a person gets infected in the first place. And so as a world in general, like, we're just not particularly well. If you just think back to those stats that I just provided before, it leaves us in a situation where you could say we're pretty much ripe for the picking. Humans are evolving, and so is all of the microbes that live around us. Bacteria, viruses, protozoa, parasites, fungi, they're all also evolving. They're not remaining static. They're very dynamic, and they're interacting with us in every moment. We're currently breathing a whole lot of them in. They're shedding from our skin. They're living on our skin. They're living in every single part of our body, and science is discovering more and more about them. They're not the enemy. It's the way that we treat ourselves that is violent, basically. And so we're also in a situation with all of this dis-ease in our populations where there is a huge reliance on magic pills to solve a prescriptive solution. I'm talking about to solve a health issue. I just want to fix the symptoms. I don't want to deal with it. I don't want to be accountable for my health. Just give me the pill. Yeah, my heart rate's too fast. Give me a pill. Oh, my cholesterol's up. Give me a pill. Oh, I put on a little bit of weight, or I've got insulin resistance, or I've got type 2 diabetes. Give me metformin. If I've got hormonal issues, give me metformin. I'm just not even listing all of them. But there's a prescription solution to anything that you go in with, and even depression, anxiety, all sorts of mental disorders. Depression has been linked to worse COVID outcomes. And it's so medicalized, and people don't look at root cause. They're not looking, what are the factors that are influencing that? There's so many things. So what happens when people are so used to being medicalized and giving over their power to somebody else who says that they know a lot more about your body and your life than what you do, is that then people rely on medications to save them. They rely on doctors to prescribe these medications. And perhaps when that happens, I'm suggesting that there's a part of them that they're relinquishing. They're relinquishing part of their own willingness, their own ability, their own creativity to actually create dedicated changes to their own health story. They're just fitting the mold. They just keep walking the path. And that highly medicalized path is funded. We are funding the pharmaceutical companies with that path. And, big data and big ag, and like there's all different interweavings between what supports populations of people getting so sick. It's not just the medications, it's an interweaving of every aspect of our society. And so are you hearing, tell me you're hearing, please, are you hearing what I'm putting across? So despite the increasing burden of multiple chronic conditions and medicalizations in humans across the world, funding for change, funding for preventative interventions, funding for wellness, and funding for any long-term health and political actions are missing. They're not there. They are nowhere to be seen. And I'm so impressed, like shockingly impressed, like so impressed my jaw fell to the floor. I've actually probably got TMJ issues from it. That the government, our government and our society have taken like extreme measures to control health outcomes in this C19 situation. Like they've gone for it. And just imagine if that level of dedication, money, research, time, political statements had been poured into reducing the very common comorbidity and risk factors that so greatly influence C19 severity prior to and during this entire unfolding over this last 18-month period. Imagine how different things could have been. Imagine the conversations we could have been having today. There would have been no mention of Freedom Day. We just would have been talking about so many other things related to living our life in the best possible way. And yet, here we are. Some people are celebrating Freedom Day, and I am celebrating being sovereign and being completely clamped down from interacting in my society as a useful person with useful knowledge, with useful abilities to help reconnect people to themselves, to their skin, to their wellness. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And so, in any situation where absolutely no health empowering information has been shared by our government to help reduce the severity of C19 symptoms, that's definitely part of the reason why I do not believe that the vaccination is my only solution. I believe that there are other solutions related to what my body can do, which could be related to the risk factors and comorbidities that are related to COVID severity and symptoms. So that's what I spend a lot of time researching, and I invite you, if you haven't done that yet, to do the same thing. I have spent countless hours poring over the latest research, as well as accessing information shared by top scientists, top doctors from all around the globe. I have not been resting on my laurels with this. I have invested a fair bit of time into really unpacking and understanding what is going on. I have a very, very, very strong knowledge of body systems and their interactions. I look at all body systems. I'm not just looking at one system like a lot of reductionist styles will do. I'm looking at how they're all interacting. I'm looking at the wholeness of you. How is everything integrating inside of you? How are all the communications in your body working together to unify and create your vitality, your energy, your health, your wellness? And so I definitely have done due diligence for anyone that feels any level of concern that I don't know what I'm talking about. You don't know where my sources are coming from. I absolutely promise I have read more journal articles than most other people. And so there is a plethora of research available. Like there's new papers being released all the time, and I check in very, very frequently. And with all of the reading that I've done, all of the research that I've done, I'm still not a believer that this particular vaccination rollout is for everyone. I believe that there are certain populations of the people that really feel that they need it and they want it, and I welcome that, absolutely. It is not necessary for every single body to have this vaccination, in my opinion. Especially because C19, the highest burden of C19 is obviously related to the highest vulnerable populations, the elderly, people over 70. Like that's not a population that I'm currently sitting in. I'm 43. I'm way off that one. And so I've got a while to go before I would be really worried that my risk factor associated, like is one of the number one risk factors associated with COVID severity. It's not there for me. So it's part of my choice to let that one go. And pre-existing medical conditions, again, that's not part of my picture. It's not part of my health story. And I'm going to unpack a few more of them a little bit later. And I'm also taking so many steps to continue to mitigate every single one of the risk factors that I'm going to talk about. And I'm definitely also aware that any medical procedure and any choice that I'm making to mitigate my health should be my choice. Like that's my whole point. It should be my choice. I'm making this choice. I'm choosing my body, and I'm choosing the information that I have available to me, and I'm choosing the nutrients that I have available to me. I'm choosing the exercise and the connection time with nature and my connection time with myself, my breath, my heart as part of my treatment protocols. Getting a standing ovation. That's always nice to hear. And so I have very grave concerns that have not in any way, shape or form been alleviated. There are so many unanswered questions, so many. And there are also so many alternative treatments that have been suppressed, quashed, retracted. You know, if you look at countries like Peru, they were allowed to use ivermectin for a little while. It got withdrawn. You can look at the science and the data related to that. It's pretty significant. And my stance is definitely not uncommon. It's just that a lot of people don't really want to speak up for fear of retribution, judgment, the fear of the mean people, basically. I feel okay with that now in the position that I'm in because of the knowledge that I hold around this. And so definitely, I'm not the only one to be sharing this information. Very similar information can be found, by top doctors and scientists from around the world, or they're trying to share it. So if you want to know more, please do your own research. Please find the people. There are voices. There are very, very clever people who've done a lot of scientific research, like a Nobel Prize winner, a co-laureate. He was one of the people that invented ivermectin. I think this is back in 2015. He has just he recently he was involved in a research paper that was released in September talking about the data sets related to ivermectin and how much of that had been suppressed and how much of the data had been remodulated, remanaged to seem that it was this particular answer or this particular result. And that is also common in science. You know, the head of one of the most prestigious journals a couple of years ago, when she was leaving as chief editor, when she left, she's like, you can't trust the journals anymore. You just can't trust. You can't trust the science. Keep asking questions, keep digging deeper, keep supporting the people out there who are asking the questions. I just wanted to drop that in there. So there's obviously definitely not enough data around long-term COVID-19 vaccine safety. It's just not possible. It only started being put into production about 2 years ago. And it's still classified then to be in its preliminary stages. This is really important. And I'm not just talking about general mRNA vaccinations. Yes, I know that they've been around for about 30 years. I'm talking about the specific structure of vaccinations related to COVID-19. They are new. There are also been some rapid developments in mRNA, sRNA, protein viral vectors and other types that are targeting this brand new virus with a virus that's still evolving. You know, it hasn't remained stagnant this whole time while we've been scrambling to keep up and work out what's going on. And it has been shocking, and I'm not trying to say that it hasn't been confusing, and I know that scientists out there are doing their most amazing job. And I'm also saying that the vaccination is still in its preliminary stages. So documented vaccination efficacy still actually remains to be determined. And yes, currently the efficacy rates, they're 95% for most of them, but there is recent evidence of waning antibody levels not too long after vaccination and certainly after periods of infection, which is pointing to the need for ongoing, continual, periodic vaccination boosters, and certainly for the new strains that are going to keep appearing. And that's looking, I was listening to a guy from the UK yesterday, looking like it's going to be once to twice a year minimum. I think that's not necessary. I actually think that is, again, another crazy input of money and finances into a product where, again, if you relate it back to my chronic condition conversation before, that same level of investment has not been applied to people at all, even knowing the information that we do have. Yeah, it is so scary. And so it means that people are kind of giving up the recognition that our immune system is clever. Our immune system can be, when provided all the right ingredients, can be incredibly competent. It does evolve. It is actually being trained continuously by interactions with our microbiome, which includes the virome, viruses, and our nervous system, and our responses and interactions with our internal world and our external world. In what way, shape, or form would I want to deny my immune system function to an ingredient that is being sold to me as a solution, but it's a forever solution? You know what's crazy? My immune system is with me forever until the day I die, and it lives inside of my body. I get to take it around with me absolutely everywhere. I never get to leave it behind. Does everything with me. I would much rather rely on that kind of relationship. It's a very close relationship, rather than somebody else deciding what needs to go into my system to protect me. Anyway, what else do I want to say? So I definitely do have very grave concerns that both the vaccinations that are currently in Victoria were developed and tested in less than the normal time protocol, much, much, much less. And in saying that, that was hailed as an extraordinary medical triumph. Like, it was the best thing that had happened, that these vaccinations had been sped up so far along the path. And I just find that a little more than astonishing, actually. I think, again, that there are some concerns that could be raised about that. The current C-19 pandemic has obviously created an unprecedented demand for rapid and high volume vaccine manufacturing. To meet this demand, several new platform technologies and conventional production approaches are being used. They are working overtime to supply the world population with vaccines that have been mandated across many countries, through the world. And I absolutely question how pharmaceutical manufacturers, how did they prepare themselves so beautifully to so rapidly produce billions of doses. In fact, some had actually already begun the commercial production of vaccinations without any of the results from the phase 3 trials, which are normally required by law before rollout because of the emergency use authorization, the EUA, that was, in countries like UK, USA, Australia, and many other countries. So obviously there was a huge monetary investment in that process into the discovery of what could be a virus vector and how to make that into a vaccination, and then the production of the vaccination, the storage, the distribution. I don't know if you know this, but some vaccination ingredients, they need to be stored at either -20 or -70. Some of those storage procedures are very expensive. Like storing something at -70 degrees Celsius is quite an expensive prospect. There's all sorts of different things that can interfere then with the efficacy of a product. And so, and then you include distribution on top of that. Like, it's pretty mind-blowing how quickly the vaccinations appeared in countries all around the world, not just here, all around the world, like so many countries. And so this vaccination rollout was achieved in record time, 12 to 16 months. And that is compared to the usual development time and rollout time of 10 to 15 years. Like, the difference is incomparable. And so classical clinical efficacy trials of vaccines usually enroll tens of thousands of healthy participants. However, to accelerate the C-19 vaccination development, clinical trial phases were combined and smaller populations were enrolled. Why would that be a problem? So that's a pretty noteworthy concern when the vaccination is now supposed to be given to all people, no matter their health status, throughout the world, or the age status. So doesn't that mean that there could be an emergence of any number of unknown side effects in these larger populations that are currently, I call it, being experimented upon, which were previously not witnessed in any of those smaller groups during short-term trials? To me, it makes sense that would happen. Like, you go have a smaller group trial with lots of healthy people, and then you use that data to say, oh yeah, it's got a great safety record, we're good to go. And then you give that same vaccination to a very wide population of people with all different sorts of health conditions and things happening inside their body that might change their response. And that's scary because phase 3 licensing trials of vaccines were submitted to this EUA, this Emergency Use Authorization, and the FDA, and parallel submission happening in all of these other countries, and therefore complete data on immune response overall and in subgroups, as well as any long-term issues, is still not available. It's still not available. That information is not available. Like, how is this okay for absolutely everybody? And so this EUA authorization around the world, I don't know if you know this, it changed liability. So laws have been changed in Australia, so last year. So basically, when the government makes the decision to roll out a vaccine without full, marketing authorization, the vaccine manufacturers are not liable for any loss or damage incurred by anyone as a result of being vaccinated. And so Australia brought that ruling into effect last year. And so again, it's a shocking understanding to have about our government and the choices that they're making supposedly for our health. So you're introducing a product that does normally have to go through extensive, like years of testing, thousands of people, larger population subsets, and you're bringing it into our communities and you're saying that you have to have this, and we've wiped the slate clean for the pharmaceutical companies for any liability issues just in case, because we're not too sure what's going on. And so you don't think that there's a whole lot of, where are the contractual obligations coming through with that? Is there a power play going on with that? Is there something happening behind the scenes with all of this money and all of these politics? I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't want to talk about it because then I'd be a conspiracy theorist, I guess. But what I am interested to know is that, do we need compensation schemes to be in place in Australia if there are serious side effects? I mean, I would think so, because I don't know if you, again, are aware of this fact. Australia currently has over 10,000 adverse incident reports happening every single month since the vaccination rollout. So over $70,000, a lot more than that, 70,000 people have had adverse incidents to the vaccination, and there is no vaccination compensation program. Is something amiss there? Are we being looked after? Is our government, does our government have our needs and our health needs at their heart? I don't have those feels, and that's been part of the decision-making process for me in regards to being very clearly pro-choice. And in this particular vaccination, I am definitely not okay with this vaccination. And so I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I am hesitant about the levels of consideration that are being placed into this particular vaccination during its rollout. So, was there appropriate demographic consideration in the design of these clinical trials? How many different races were in there? What about the varying age groups? What about those people with comorbidities? What about pregnancy? What about lactation? I actually was looking at a study today. They know that the mRNA byproducts from the vaccination are coming through lactation milk. Singapore is suggesting that lactating mothers throw out their milk for 7 days after a vaccination. And so 7 days of not having contact time and skin time, and that baby not getting the nutrients that are made from that mother, and the changes that happen to her milk production, what are the ripple effects of that? Is that okay? I think that there's so much to think about, in all of these different situations. And so I really do think that the fast tracking of this vaccination may, and I think is, turning pretty unfavourable. And also, because of the big, fast manufacturing process and the distribution processes, maybe ineffective vaccinations and maybe partial or even no immunity to some vaccinated people. And you can read more there's a scientific paper that I have accessed for some of those facts. COVID-19 vaccines, rapid development, implications, challenges, and future prospects. It's a 2021 article. I do like to keep in mind that all the current clinical trials, and it is definitely still in trial phase, are under the control of the pharmaceutical companies that are selling the end product. So they do have an outcome bias in mind, and there's a lot of scientific papers written about scientific bias and where scientific studies can go with their conclusions. I don't know if you need to take a breath, but I need to have a sip of water, so please take a little breath, take a little moment, allow yourself to digest and absorb this information. I've shared a lot. there's a lot to think about, and it's not so straightforward as people believe. Can you clarify that question a little bit more for me, Carissa? About placebos going out. Do you mean that there are placebos in the population? I just love a little bit more clarity with that question. And so now I get to move back into the overall lack of empowering health education related to caring for specific pathways that are related to C19. Obviously, I've already expressed that it shocked me. I definitely want to share so much more about some of that, and I feel like I could talk for about 3 years on this topic. Like, there's so many different points that we could interact with. But what I think is just an extra important thing to take home from this, vaccination and manufacture and rollout plan. So we've got a global population of about 8 billion people, and the suggestion is that it's a minimum of 2 doses. Now it's looking like it's a minimum of definitely 3. So if pharma companies are banking on the fact that these mandates that are going out across the world means that everybody in the population has to get vaccinated or coerced into vaccination, then could be suggested that it's a minimum of 16 billion vaccinations that are going to be rolled out in, over the next short amount of time. Like, it's a huge sum of money. It is a huge sum of money. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of vaccinations. That's a lot of different processes that is worthy to think about. Someone told me that a portion of the population are receiving a placebo as part of the trial phase. I actually am not aware of that. I have not seen that in the literature. That's the first time I've heard that. So thank you for sharing. I will look into that. That hasn't come up into my awareness before. And so, what was I going to say? So we've got these huge rollouts of vaccinations that are applicable now across all people, all ages, all countries, no matter your status. Yet at the same time, absolutely zero information being shared on what to preventatively do to reduce symptomology, whether or not you're unvaccinated or vaccinated. Both people can still get COVID. It's just that if you're vaccinated, your symptomology is going to be much less mild. Some people might want to avoid that altogether and start doing preventative health measures to look after themselves. And so obviously we know, vaccinated people can still transmit the infection just the same as an unvaccinated person. They can become infected just the same as an unvaccinated person, just that their symptomology is less. But now we've got these new strains that are making their way around the globe. And that's what these boosters are for, because it's making the vaccinations that might currently already be in someone's body much less effective for these new strains that are coming out. And so what does that mean exactly? How many more boosters? How many more strains are going to come out? How many? How often? It's kind of an exponential discussion because viruses are growing, evolving, and changing all the time. And so it's a pretty big room to be stuck in. Once you start walking that path, and that's the belief that you hold, that you have to continue to get boosters for every single new variation that comes out, it's a whole lifetime of stacking on vaccinations once or twice or potentially even more times during the year. And without understanding what the long-term health implications of those current vaccinations are, because they're still in trial phase development. So in terms of the lapses in manufacturing quality that have already been reported, there's definitely been difference between the Sinovac vaccination, the AstraZeneca, and the Sanofi GSK vaccination. So that's in the scientific literature. Yeah, you know what, this anti-vax conversation, I had a doctor on our page the other day call me an anti-vaxxer, and I'm just really pro-choice. I don't think all vaccinations are bad. I don't necessarily think that this vaccination is really bad. I want it to be about pro-choice. I want it to be about choosing whether or not I have this vaccination and to not be punished for my choice. I also want it to be about people understanding, and myself very deeply understanding, that there are many different things that I can do to access and optimize my immune system in really profound ways that should mean I don't need this vaccination. Just saying. What's your opinion on so you think that there was ill intention behind the creation of the vax? Look, you know what? I guess it's one of those discussions where we'll never know. How are we ever going to know? I have gone down the rabbit hole quite a few times, and I always want to believe the best about people. And I just know that when there's money and power involved, it's hard to keep believing the best about people. And the fact that we'll never know, I guess I decided that I didn't really want to keep wasting my time and resources on trying to unpack that. I'm not too sure even a global citizen, as an Australian citizen, I'm not too sure as a person what sort of impact that I could make around that. I knew that my impact that I could make around that was much more related to health discussions, and I guess that's where I placed my focus. That came out from Pfizer and the discussions around... Did I see the whistleblower that came out from Pfizer and the discussions around using aborted fetal cells in the development of the vaccine? Oh, that's just one of many amazing facts, stunning facts, from people who have left some of the big pharmaceutical companies. And honestly, they're brave people, because I don't know how much notice you've taken of people who are sharing different opinions. They are squashed. They are, subjected to all sorts of defamation. Awful things happen to people online that change the trajectory of their life once they speak out and up against these sort of huge corporations that have so much money and resources behind them. And yeah, I don't not believe anything until I've done my own research. I guess that's what I'm saying. I'm pro-choice. I'm open to perspective. I don't want to have a really narrow perspective. I want to be able and available inside myself to be open to a level of flexibility where I'm curious. Curiosity leads to innovation and creation, but it also leads to new pathways of understanding myself and or others. And it is what science is about, actually. And I think that science has done all sorts of wild, horrible, wacky, and amazing things to get to the point where they are now. Yeah, I could keep talking about that. It's a huge conversation. There's so much info. There is so much info, and I haven't spoken about it yet, but that is where tall belly. I think that's, my eyesight's not really working. I hope I said that right. But that's where your somatic awareness and your connection to yourself may be over, you might be overriding that with your mind. And so giving yourself enough presence and awareness in a moment to be like, do I really need to read this? Is this really good for me? Is this helping me right now? Where do I need to go to from here? Having that level of connection with your body and knowing whether you are just creating chaos in your mind or whether you're supporting your ongoing processes. They're very different planes of living, and it's taken me a long time to reduce, at least. I haven't eliminated yet, but I've reduced drastically the amount of control that my mind wants to place upon my information gathering. I listen to the physiological signs in my body, and when I'm getting really stressed, I turn stuff down, I shut down my laptop, I turn off my phone, I put down the books, I'm out, I'm back, and I'm calibrating to the heartbeat in my body, not to the very negative comments that might be running through my mind. And I'm a very well-informed person, and I do not watch commercial media. I do not really engage that much in social media. I do through my business platforms, but I don't scroll. I'm not really looking at what other people are doing. My other business, Pia Kynok Holistic Education, I just spend a lot of time looking at informative posts of people who are very inspiring and educational. I actually just do not look at other stuff. And I am really happy to look at the scientific research. And I'm really aware that there's a lot of people that have created, I guess, a lot of just as much equal and opposite negative energy with their conspiracies and with some of their huge projections about what is happening in the world. And sometimes that can be really hard to navigate when you don't know very much about one arena or the other, when you're just trying to traverse through the middle path. And so it doesn't matter which side you're going on, if you just gently move into an area of information and feed yourself a little bit more, work out whether you like it or not, whether it's helpful or not, whether you're expanded or not, and then go to the other side. Don't block off either side. I just have to be careful about how dense the energy can get. And so I also want to make sure I'm connecting with people that lift me up, make me feel higher. So I hope that made sense. And so I haven't said this yet, but for all of those watching now, for all of those watching the replay, I'm absolutely not suggesting that catching COVID wouldn't be a terrifying concept. There are definitely long-term health implications, and I can talk about that, is related to mitochondrial dysfunction and immune system dysfunction and nervous system dysfunction and endocrine dysfunction that would have been underlying in that person anyway, exacerbated by a viral infection, a little bit like what Epstein-Barr virus can do. It's a chronic infection. Herpes lies dormant, can then come up again, have implications for our health every time we're stressed and overwhelmed. And so I want to know from the research that I've done, what else can be done to prevent or reduce this cytokine storm. So I don't know if you've heard this word cytokine. Cytokine just basically means like an inflammatory signaling agent. There's many of them in our body. There's so many different types of cytokines, but basically COVID-19 comes, infiltrates into our body, starts accessing different points of our system, whether it's through our lungs. It creates other processes I'll talk about in a second. But this level of disruption creates a whole lot of inflammation in our body. Our body kind of goes, and if you've already got a lot of underlying inflammation in your body, that signal comes through big, strong, and loud. The body's like, I'm already inflamed, and now I have a virus. So it does get hyper agitated, hyper excited. And that cytokine storm is what is a big, big indicator of how bad COVID will be for you and the severity of your ongoing symptoms, and definitely can increase your risk of mortality. So it's a pretty big deal. And now they're actually, in the scientific journals, they're looking at different ways they can use a pharmaceutical to reduce the cytokine storm, which is really important. And there are some things that you can do winding back before you're in hospital to assist that process. And so I feel like I've gone off my page. I want to talk about this COVID-19 pathology or pathophysiology. So we know it's linked to this cytokine response, this hyperinflammatory response. They can measure the pathological cytokine levels. Like, it's definitely a big deal in science right now. And so there's a term, cytokine storm syndrome. This is the critical hallmark of the severity of the disease. About 5% of the infected population will kind of move into this point into critical care units. So it's not a huge proportion of the population, but every single person that catches COVID will get an elevation in cytokine signaling. They might not get the full-on cytokine storm and the full-on things that creates, but every single person will get an elevated inflammatory signaling. And so we already know, like, fever, cough, dyspnea, myalgia, or fatigue, they're all part of the common symptomology. But what I think is important for people who've got this long COVID, like the after effects that, people have said to me, you don't care about the people who've got long COVID, you're not vaccinated, what about these populations of people that have got debilitating issues? And I do care about people who've got debilitating issues. I want to help as many people as I can over the course of my lifetime. What I know, the science and literature that I understand, is that mitochondrial dysfunction is going to play a huge role in how that person survives and then thrives post C19 infection. And so if you've never heard of mitochondria before, almost every single cell in our body, apart from our red blood cells, have got mitochondria in there. They're like the little energy powerhouses that keep all of our cells and tissues and organs doing something. And we've got about 2,000 around about in each cell. And it adds up to, like, I don't know, we've got 10 billion million or something in our whole body. Like, there's a huge amount of mitochondria that are doing a huge amount of work, keeping our systems activated. Without energy, we can't turn genes on and off. The genes that are turned on and off, they create the signaling for what happens with protein production and enzyme production and immune cell production, and all the different cell productions have to be signaled by a gene code. That gene code, to get to that point, we have to have the energy to open up the pages of the gene code. And so the mitochondrial function has so much to do with what's happening in people's bodies before COVID, during COVID, and post-COVID. And there are definite measures that everyone can take to support themselves through that. And I'm not going to focus so much of my conversation on mitochondrial function today, because it's a great conversation. I could talk about it for a while. But what we also have had in Australia and worldwide, and particularly in Victoria, is a very long COVID shutdown situation. Yeah, like I've forgotten how many days it is. Maybe if someone here who's in Melbourne knows, you could tell me in the comments. It's been a long, long time that we have been locked up and shut down and disconnected from our society, our jobs, you know, from living our life purpose. And at the same time, that has promoted, and they've done scientific studies on this, this is not me just saying it, it's promoted dietary changes, increases in body weight, increases in drinking, increases in smoking. I find that pretty wild, considering I'm just about to talk about it in a second, but obesity and low physical levels and a whole lot of other things like smoking and drinking, they increased risk factors for COVID-19 severity and pathophysiology. And when you add to that the malnutrition that a lot of people have put their bodies through over this very stressful time of COVID lockdown, a lot of people haven't been looking after themselves nutritionally. They haven't been sleeping well. They haven't been moving well. There's been a lot of time on screens. There's been a lot of EMF, production and oxidation happening in their systems. There is, in hospitals looking after COVID-19 patients, malnutrition and nutritional deficiencies are a big part of every single case. And no one's really mentioning that. Again, it's just one of those very basic fundamental points of optimal human physiology that seems to just be not addressed at all at the moment. The only solution, in my opinion, is not a vaccination. There are other solutions available to us if we address these specific points. And so I'd love to talk a little bit about immune function and inflammation homeostasis. And so immune function and inflammation homeostasis, it's very dynamic. It's a process that's happening 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in our body. There's a really complex interplay happening between all of our epithelial tissue particularly. So our skin, our eyes, our whole entire digestive system, our lungs, for girls also your vaginal tissue, that's all epithelial tissue. And so our immune system, our nervous system, and our microbiomes and our hormonal systems, those four kind of units are all interplaying and talking and communicating the entire time, assessing, surveying, checking out the environment externally or internally, deciding what's safe, what's not, what are we going to do with whatever the thing is that's not safe, what are we going to do with the thing that is safe. And so in terms of the specific vitamins related to COVID-19 symptomology, vitamins A, C, D, E, B group vitamins, but particularly B2, B6, B12, folic acid. I don't know if you know much about the methylation pathway, but they are very much related, those B group vitamins and folate, to the methylation pathway, which is to do with genes being able to turn on and off. We've got micronutrients like iron, selenium, zinc, macronutrients, like if you're protein deficient, protein is the building blocks of our body, but omega-3 fatty acids, medium and long chain fatty acids, other very specific amino acids like NAC, N-acetylcysteine, and glutamine. There are bioactive compounds that we get from plants called polyphenols, as well as the fibers that are very, very helpful in addressing what's happening with COVID. Obviously, we also need water. We thrive with water in our body, and it does help a lot of our different supply chains, like our blood flow and our lymphatic flow, for a lot of these nutrients to get anywhere. So dehydration is going to add and compound any inflammatory exacerbation. And so all of the things that I've just mentioned, I personally have focused very, very heavily upon every single one of those nutrients since COVID first started. Another reason why I feel completely great about being unvaccinated. I feel like I'm safe. I feel like I've cared for myself in a very specific way related to the scientific research. And so what else is going to impact immune function? So dietary wise, the big ones, you've already heard this, but let's go through it again. Saturated fat, trans fat, animal derived proteins, added refined sugars, a low fiber diet, a low water diet. I do not eat like that. I feel very comfortable and confident in my ability to be more COVID safe than some other people. And so to initiate systemic inflammation, viruses have to be transmitted across the mucosal epithelium, and then they can spread through the body. And so one of the things our very clever epithelia, doesn't matter where we're talking, skin, eyes, digestive system, lungs, anywhere, they have this very special component that is unique to them. It's called tight junctions. They help keep our barrier really strong. So basically any barrier, you don't want it to be leaky. Imagine if your skin, your gut, your lungs were real leaky. Things could get in that shouldn't be, and things could get out that shouldn't be. So we want our epithelial tissue to be a barrier. It is an environmental barrier, internal and external. And so part of what regulates the tightness of this barrier is tight junctions. Tight junctions have very specific nutrients associated with their particular health. Some of them I've already mentioned, like vitamin A, vitamin D, choline, omega-3s, zinc. They have a lot to do with the regulation of those tight junctions. So those tight junctions are affected with COVID. And a lot of the time people have a little bit of leakiness to start off with. It makes them much more susceptible to a viral infestation, a viral entry agent, a pathogen being able to slip through those little cracks. There are so many different things that can impact tight junction formation. Glyphosate is a really big one. It's a pesticide used worldwide, found in many, many food products, particularly refined food products, particularly wheat, corn, that sort of stuff. Glyphosate exposure will induce tight junction leakiness. Again, very highly scientifically researched. Heavy metal toxins can influence tight junctions. Those nutrient deficiencies can influence tight junctions. So many different things can influence those tight junctions that we have modifiable control over. And that hasn't been spoken about. I find that odd. And so in mast cells, once the C19 moves through our mucosal epithelial, they disrupt the tight junctions. We have another protective mechanism that comes along next. It's the mast cell. So a mast cell is one of our immune cells. It's like, oh my God, something's happening. I'm going to degranulate. I'm going to let go some of my products sitting inside of me. One of them is histamine. It's an inflammatory mediator. And histamine comes out and it adds to the inflammation, and it adds to our defensive mechanisms when the virus first comes in. What they do know is that too many mast cells degranulating and releasing too much histamine is a problem for COVID-19 severity. And so if, again, like I have, you wanted to do as many things as possible to reduce any symptomology and even the virus coming into my body, I am now eating a low histamine diet. I don't use fragrances. I don't use fragrance sticks. I use essential oils. I mean, I'm surrounded by essential oils, actually. I use them on my skin every day, but I'm not burning scented candles. I don't use fragrance washing powder. I don't know. There's so many different things that can increase histamine. Foods are a big one. Foods are a really big trigger. Smoking is a big trigger. I mean, the list goes on. But I am proactively reducing the amount of histamine in my body because of that mast cell activation that can happen with COVID. And so psychological stress also can influence mast cell degranulation. I do specifically want to highlight vitamin D in these nutrients as well. Vitamin D deficiency is one of the biggest nutrients associated with COVID progression. And a June 2021 meta-analysis research paper. So a meta-analysis means that they're looking at lots and lots of different research papers and coming up with a general equation. Vitamin D supplementation is associated with much improved clinical outcomes, even when administered after the diagnosis of COVID-19. So whether it's pre or during or even post, vitamin D supplementation can assist COVID symptomology and severity. I'm taking vitamin D every single day. I'm taking it in a pretty high dose. Another deficiency that's going to be a big one is omega-3 deficiency, or alternatively you could maybe have enough omega-3s coming in, but you've got a really high ratio of omega-6s, which is quite common. That's going to lead to prothrombotic and pro-inflammatory state. They are both associated with COVID, severity and symptomology. A low omega-3 state is also related to obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease. Those three diseases are related to COVID-19 severity. So I'm really aware of my omega-3 to omega-6 ratios. I look after it every single day on purpose, with awareness, with intention. What else is going to increase inflammation? Gut dysfunction. I've done a lot of work on my gut. My gut's very, very healthy. But for people out there with bacterial infections, viral infections, parasitic infections, microbiome changes, gut dysbiosis, leaky gut, they're going to have some immune issues. They are setting themselves up for an entry point to a virus, and it makes it much easier to get sicker and to get sicker faster. And so there are lots and lots of different signs of gut dysfunction. You know, maybe it's alternating constipation and diarrhea. Maybe it's just constipation. Maybe it's just diarrhea. Maybe it's bloating after meals, food intolerances. There's many different signs and symptoms of an unhappy gut. And it's one of the factors that I have markedly reduced in my life as being an issue. And I'm going to skip a whole lot of these points. What other lifestyle modifiable factors increase underlying inflammation in a person's body? High cholesterol. How many people do you know on cholesterol reducing medication? It's a very, very common across Australia. High cholesterol makes our immune system function quite challenged, and the medication that people go on make our system quite challenged. It decreases our endogenous production of coenzyme Q10 and other lipid molecules. That's actually not helpful long term for most people's health and wellness, which is why sometimes people start on a anti-cholesterol medication and then they end up having another one and another one and another one. All of a sudden they're stacked on with all these different medications. High blood sugar levels, they are also quite debilitating for immune system function, hormonal function. They have far-reaching effects across all different aspects of our body. I don't have high cholesterol. I do not have high blood sugar. I feel very comfortable not being vaccinated with those risk factors gone. What else contributes? Sedentary behaviors, lack of exercise, more time in built or dense urban environments, less time in nature. I live my life in the exact complete opposite way. What else contributes? Social isolation, chronic fear, uncertainty. These will all increase inflammation, and so will reduce access to support, connection. So will financial and economic stress, education stress, stress of all types, physical, emotional, mental, spiritual. I'm not going to concentrate on the spiritual conversation here, but what I mean is that connection point, that understanding in something greater than ourselves, like that ability to have faith and to keep trusting. And that is a very universal kind of feeling and connection point. And I definitely have had all of those things impact me in significant ways since COVID starting, the social isolation, the chronic fear, the uncertainty. And I have done very significant work on reducing all of them. I've actively worked on addressing each single one of them with love, kindness, patience, and effort. I haven't swept them under the rug. I've turned and faced all of them, and I've done the work to be really happy and much less stressed in my body and in my mind and in my spirit. And so there are many people in our society that haven't addressed these issues. What goes along, you know, as I mentioned before, with being forced into a situation that you don't really love, is that there is a lot of grief and helplessness and disempowerment, anger, rage, sadness, like so many different emotions wrapped up in being forced into doing something that you really didn't want to do. And that level of unaddressed grief, all of those unaddressed emotions that have been suppressed and denied and rejected in our society right now, the ripple effects of that have far-reaching impacts on people's psychological health and wellness. If something's impacting you psychologically, it's going to be impacting you physiologically. And I have grave concerns about that as we continue to move forward. And I do like to put it out there into the collective as something to think about, something to be aware of with others around you, to be aware of with yourself. And I guess to address this point, I've done a lot of work on that trauma within myself, a lot. And so I feel confident that that's not impacting my stress levels, my inflammation levels. Thyroid abnormalities are going to impact inflammation, hormonal dysfunction, sleep dysfunction, alcohol. I really want to talk about this one. I'm nearly finished. So if you're still with me, thank you. But alcohol is definitely known to have an impact on ciliary function in the upper airways, impairs the function of immune cells like our alveolar macrophages, like literally in our lungs, where COVID entry is mainly said to happen. It weakens the barrier function of our epithelia in our lower airways. As well as that, it has dramatic impacts upon innate and adaptive immunity. It weakens all of our defenses. It disrupts our gut function. And alcohol impacts in Australia over COVID have increased. Alcohol shops obviously remained open the entire time of COVID-19 shutdowns. They were open as an essential business, even though chronic alcohol consumption creates greater risk for immune dysfunction. That has never made any sense to me, and I feel like it's a very unsupportive aspect of what the government was doing. And so they know that spending went up by almost 25%. And the government suggested that one of the caveats to note when interpreting the Commonwealth Bank of Australia card spending data included that an increase in spending does not necessarily equate to an increase in consumption of alcohol. I don't know how many people were stockpiling alcohol, but I feel like most people were drinking it. And so during the COVID pandemic, we've had a significant unmet need for drug and alcohol counselling. That's definitely known. We also have had deaths attributed to alcohol as a cause increase by over 8%. And we've got about 4,504 alcohol-related deaths that happened. I want to talk about these death numbers for a second. 4,504 alcohol-related deaths last year. Influenza and pneumonia had 2,287. Suicide, the 15th leading cause of death. Over 3,000 people took their own lives, which is devastating for so many reasons. COVID is the 38th cause of death last year, and since COVID began, our total Australian death toll is 1,611. And I just think it's so interesting that we have never been so protective about other health issues facing everyday Australians every single year. The death toll is much higher still for so many of those cases, and no one's doing anything preventative or proactive about that. And so I'm not going to talk about smoking, I'm not going to talk about diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular disease anymore, but the obesity thing is a huge one. So if you don't know, waist circumference is the best measure. For women, it's 88 centimeters. For men, it's 102 centimeters. In 2017-18, nearly 70% of Australians aged 18 and over were overweight or obese. So 2/3 of our population, that's about 12.5 million adults. And obesity is said to be more common in older age groups, but 1/3 of our kids are now obese in Australia. And there's been an increase in obesity from about 1 in 5 adults, about 20% in 1995, to over 1 in 3 adults in 2020. So we're getting bigger. If we're getting bigger, we're getting sicker. The bigger you are, the more overweight and obese someone is, the layers of inflammation that are running through that person's body become more and more significant with every single gram or kilo of weight that person puts on. And that's not being addressed, that's not being spoken about. And that is a preventative health measure that could have come into some sort of effect or had some sort of power or momentum behind it at the very beginning of 2020. And we would have had a healthier population, we would have better long-term health outcomes, we would have decreased inflammation, we would have reduced COVID severity. That was never discussed, it was never mentioned, it's still not mentioned, it's still not discussed. And it's part of the reason why our population is getting sicker and sicker and sicker with many more chronic conditions. It's just not okay. And so obesity and vitamin D deficiency, I think, are like the 2 greatest public health measures that could have been undertaken instead of the 2 vaccinations that are being pressed upon us as the solution. I think the science is actually really, really clear. For all the people that have told me that the science is really, really clear, for me, it is, with the scientific research that I've done. Being overweight and obese with or without vitamin D deficiency decreases our immune response. It favours COVID-19 virulence, promotes respiratory distress syndrome and severe symptomology, and you're much more likely to die. And without a doubt, these 1,611 deaths from COVID, they are tragic. They never should have happened. I don't want them to happen. But the part of a human life cycle is that we live and then we die of different conditions. That so much focus is being placed just upon this one condition and not all the myriad of others that impact the severity of this condition doesn't make sense to me. And so we have 33,000, just 33,500 total cases in our total population of over 25 million people currently. So there's 33,000 in a mild condition and 312 people in a serious or critical condition. And I just want to send love and blessings to every single one of those people. And I hope that the government does more to address the ongoing needs of our population in a health way. As I mentioned before, we've had over 70,000 adverse responses issued. That's over 10,000 people per month since the vaccinations was rolled out. I also know that a huge amount of money is at stake here. So the federal budget reveals a huge $311 billion cost of COVID to Australian economy. and that we spend on pharmaceutical protection that doesn't seem to be working as well as what it was promised to. It's a huge amount of money for something that I don't think is stacking up to the promises. The government has also contracted for an extra 30 million doses of the Pfizer vaccine, but will not reveal the cost due to commercial in-confidence sensitivities. And my understanding is that if you buy something, you like to use it up, yeah? 30 million doses. It's a lot of people that are still going to be requiring a vaccination in Australia from Pfizer. And so Pfizer and BioNTech, they made $50 billion so far this year. Moderna has got about $19 billion. Johnson & Johnson about $10 billion from their rollout in 1 year. These numbers are huge. They're huge. This is a really big game. And I don't want to play this game. I do not want to play this game. I feel I have done an amazing job at every single one of my personal health parameters, all the ones that I've just listed, all the ones that I've made an impact on, all the ones that I've been conscious of. And that's been part of my choice to remain unvaccinated. It's part of my personal choice to do with sovereignty, my own body autonomy. It's about listening to my own body wisdom. It's about listening to the prayer in my heart. It's about understanding that I need to keep a level of curiosity and not just believe things that are fed to me, and certainly to keep asking questions when even many people around me said to shut up and don't ask any more questions. I feel like hopefully I've addressed a few different issues or concerns that maybe you had or maybe you didn't know about. Hopefully you feel more well informed. I feel the effects of corruption, money and power distorting our health in Australia, and it's certainly not a place that I wish to continue anybody in Australia being forced into. And so to finish up, I do not believe that a system-wide and mandated approach to stopping the C-19 pandemic requires the introduction of different vaccines based on different mechanisms of actions to cover our global health needs. I do believe a system-wide approach to reduce systemic inflammation and the burden of chronic disease, including obesity, would be powerful, would be effective, and would be completely viable if funded with the same vigor vaccinations have been. I believe in the wisdom of my body. I work with it. I listen to it. I love my body. I care for it. I have made very proactive choices about how I care for it since C-19 started. And my entire body gave me a very clear NO when it came to asking whether the vaccination would be okay for me. And so that's why I've taken all of these measures. That's why I'm sharing these measures. And I also want to positively impact the people around me. And so, in summation, the C-19 directions adopted by Australia's governments have the effect of violating the rule of law when they excessively interfere with the life, liberty, and property of the citizen. And I'm hoping it is because they are not locked into big contracts with big pharma. This is our government. This is the government of our people. This is the government of me. This is the government elected by the people. They are exercising emergency powers to take away rights of the people, to take away the rights of me. They're imposing extra constitutional measures that undermine the principles of equality before the law and the right of all of its citizens to object to any form of medical treatment, including vaccine mandates. These mandates are imposed either directly or by coercive measures, or indirectly by extending benefits only to vaccinated people. It's not okay. And I do have a choice. And currently the choice that I'm making is crippling me on a financial and a business basis. And I think that that is really unfair. I am a citizen that has always paid her taxes, paid all of my dues. I have contributed. I have been philanthropic. I've invested in my community, and I am being legislated against, basically, and not able to operate in a way that continues to support my community. I think it's unfair. I think it's not okay. And I think that many other options are available to support all of us. And I don't think that the vaccination is our full and total solution the way that so many people have been led to believe. And I hope that some of the science and the information that I gave you tonight helped you understand more about that too. I'll leave you now. I've been talking for a very long time. I love you. And yeah, I hope that if this landed for you, please share it. Please share it with other people. I think that would be really helpful. Much love, and thanks for staying on. All of those people that stayed to the very end, you guys are amazing. I do not mind if you message me after this live. Sorry, I've missed all these comments. Bye, Kai. Miss you. Can you add anything about how the virus has not yet been isolated? Yes, so the vaccinations are working on different parts and components of the virus. Is that what you mean? There's so many things about this virus and the development of this virus that science doesn't understand, and they do not. That's why vaccine efficacy and like its long term is not working the way that they said that it was going to. Definitely. Oh, no worries, Georgia, for running and letting me know. You've got long COVID. You still don't believe in people being forced. I'm sorry that you've got long COVID. That's really full on. Yeah, and this is the thing. Your health was not great before you got COVID, and it definitely is contributing to your long COVID. And the mitochondrial dysfunction would definitely be a pathway back into finding some really good health. I can reach out if you need to know some more. So many factors, so many comments. Sorry, everyone. My phone wasn't flicking up for these. Thank you to everyone that joined. I have had so much fun sharing. I am taking in-person clients. Yes, you just got to find me on the Inspiration Place site and put in a request for a booking. I would love to serve you and look after you. And yeah, I mean, my healings, my sessions, my healings, my health, bubble, I guess, of how I look after people is related to all aspects of self, like the you know, your mental body, your emotional body, your physical body, your spiritual body, and the integration of how all of these systems are working to complement each other, unite with each other, collaborate with each other, be curious together so that you can grow and develop and evolve. I would certainly love to help you with that. Anyway, I think you guys have been amazing for listening to me the whole time. Do we need to be jabbed? The last question I think this is coming to. What a great way to finish off. In my opinion, for my body, absolutely not. And for your body and for your different health needs, that answer might be different. I do not believe that our body is incapable of doing an amazing job of combating COVID-19. And I also want to mention that there was on one of our posts the other day, just to do with the important announcement, there was a doctor and I that had a little bit of a discussion about, you know, a whole lot of different points, many of which I've mentioned in this conversation. You don't need to go back and read them. But one of her points was one of the papers that I quoted, and I also quoted it in this conversation today. It was a 2021 paper. She was like, oh, there's a bit in there about how the unvaccinated created the biggest measles outbreak in the US. I don't know, in many years. I can't remember exactly how many years. It had been a long time, I think nearly 20 years. And so I did a little bit more further investigation around that. And so this measles outbreak in 2019 was in Portland. I think it was 764 people. 30% of them were vaccinated. 6% of them were hospitalized. I think 9 people, and it was short stay hospitalizations. Everyone was fine. I've done more research since then because I wanted to look at, you know, what nutrients are involved with, you know, measles severity, which is still a big issue in a lot of underdeveloped countries. Well, wouldn't you know it, malnutrition and nutritional deficiencies contribute to the severity of measles. And vitamin A can actually be used as a prophylactic. Like, you can give high supplemental vitamin A and it can make a difference to measles symptomology and severity. And so again, there's just so many arguments and so many points that sometimes people can make. If you just do a little bit more research, a little bit more digging, a little bit more of your own information, understanding. And I'm lucky because I've done all the work and I've paid all the money and I've educated myself to be at a point where I'm like, I can go to those links. But there are the links there. The information is there. The human body is incredible. Nutrients are incredible. What we choose to do, how we choose to think, how we choose to move every single day can have incredible impacts for us, for better or for worse. We are the designers of our life, and we are the designers of our health. And the way that I'm choosing to design and co-create in my life, I do not want to be dictated against by someone. I do not want to be dictated to by somebody else. I do not want to be forced. One of the blessings of my entire lifetime that I have said thank you to for so many times is being Australian. I'm born in the lucky country. I'm born in a country where basically I feel free. I'm also born at a time in my life where women aren't punished for being women. Like, the equality is still building, but equality is more of a thing. There's more openness between gay people and binary and trans and anything that you want to be. There is more equality. And what's happened over this last 18 months? What of all the things that we've been working towards as populations, where has that gone? Why has segregation, division and judgment come back in as normalized in our lives? And when people are segregated, judged, when there's fear, when there's pressure, people behave differently. When people are fed constant streams of information that keep them worried about their physiological needs, their baseline safety needs, like my work, my education, my kids, my family, my physical health, people act and respond differently. They are more aggressive. They're accessing more of their amygdala. It changes their cortical higher executive functions. They start looping in old patterns and old habits. It changes so many of their decision-making processes, and I can understand why there is so much literally trauma being projected from so many people at the moment, because so many of our community have been forced into believing that their baseline needs are being threatened 24/7 at the moment. They are being threatened by our government and they don't need to be. And that's what I'm hoping with all of this information that I've talked about. And I can talk about any of these subjects, as I said, for hours, like each one of them. Like, you can unpack and talk about each one of them so much more in terms of how it specifically relates to any virus symptomology, not just COVID. And this is what I mean. We can't just, throw it up into the wind and be like, sure, pharmaceutical companies forever, help my body live this life, which is with all of its variances of viruses, because we literally live in trillions and trillions of them. We are breathing them in. They live in our seas, they live in our soil, they live in our body. What are we going to do when the viruses turn against us? The viruses aren't turning against us. We need to catch up. We need to be more healthy. We need to design the health of our body. And we don't need people taking away our rights to be able to do so. Cleverly, with thought, with conscious awareness, with scientific education, scientific literature. Oh, amazing. I just went on another rant. Is there any further questions or any other input that anyone would like to provide? If you have any questions before I go, or if I've missed any questions, please, hit me up, let me know. Chris is laughing at me because I went on a little passion rant. Yeah, amazing. Hey, you guys, I have had, I guess I find sharing information fun. I have found it shocking that I have needed to do this. I have found it shocking that this is where we're at, where our baseline foundational fundamental needs of our body are being completely ignored, and something foreign to our body is being given complete precedence over anything that our body can do. And potentially for some people in this current environment, again, as I said, maybe the vaccination, if you're highly vulnerable, maybe the vaccination is your best option. However, if you feel that you have enough reserves and resources and support in your life to make the changes that are required on a daily basis to be healthy, to be thoughtful, to listen to your body, to input into it in a way that optimizes its function, then that is available to you. And I don't think I'm being selfish making all those choices. As I said, every single point that is related to COVID mortality and comorbidity and severity and risk factors, I have addressed. In my personal life, I have completely addressed every single one of them, and I hopefully inspire other people to do the same. For those who are asking, to come and see me in person, I don't know when we will be allowed to do that. It's devastating, but we aren't allowed to look after anyone in person until an unknown time or event that the government decides is okay. And that's why I started this whole conversation tonight with, congratulations to those people who feel like it's Freedom Day and you can do the things that you want to do because you've molded to fit with what the government said is an okay thing to do, and everyone's got their own choice to do that. I, however, because I'm outside of the lines of government regulations, I am not feeling that sense of freedom. I'm not feeling that sense of inclusivity, and I certainly am not feeling that level of support. And yeah, for someone who's worked tirelessly to be a really proud, upstanding member of the business community and overall community, I just think that that is a dreadful position to be in. And I support every single person that feels confused and conflicted by these decisions right now, and I completely acknowledge that it is confusing and it is deliberately so. And I invite you to keep searching for the information that resonates deeply with you and keep asking more questions. Why? What happens then? How does this work? What, why, where, how? They are very powerful questions, curious questions, open-ended questions. They go a long, long way in the path of discovery of self and of others and of health. All right. I really feel like I need to sign off. I love you. Bye. I'm sorry to leave you. I've had a really lovely time hanging out with you. See you.